So hydroponics in a closet, you certainly can do it, but you'll have to choose and select your environment very carefully.
I'm off the grid, so I'm all solar. And I did my first grow when I got here, got my card, I was all excited, and I thought, oh, it's Hawaii, you can grow anything anywhere, you know, and failed miserably, basically. It's in terms of, you know, how much I was able to get. I didn't get the yield that I wanted to. Right. And so my solar system is very small because I can't afford one of these $10,000 systems. And so light is an issue. And so how much light do I absolutely have to add to my sunlight in order to get the effect that I want and the yields that I want? And what's the best way to do that on a solar system? Because obviously every watt counts.
Lighting can be very expensive, as I'm sure many of you have found out. Being the most efficient we can be with the watts that we're using is very important. I would never recommend 1,000 watt anything. 600 watts is pushing it. But the high intensity discharge systems are the tools of yesterday and what we had that was available at that time. And LED for recreational and medical states, using LED that demonstrates good science, because there's no shortage of LED systems with bad science. You've all heard the blue light, red light. It's nonsense. Plants want the sun. It's nature and evolution. We don't get to change it or reinvent it. So the quality of light is important. But here in Hawaii, the days are short. So extending that photo period and making long days is what's going to make a big difference in yield and performance and time, and being able to do it again and again, year in and year out. LEDs can more easily be transitioned to your solar setup so that it's more interfaceable. It's an option, but it also can be expensive. I don't know if that answered your question.
If you're growing in a closet, what size, and you have a regular standard size door to the closet, what size vents do you need in the bottom and top? And what wattage light do you use so that it doesn't overheat? And do you need a fan to circulate the air?
Well, for the record, I would never grow in a closet. I mean, you can, and people do it, but I wouldn't do it. It's just not set up for being a space to have controlled environment in agriculture. It's a tendency to get too hot, and it's a tougher environment to control. You have to punch holes in the walls and hang lights. It's feasible. I mean, you can do it, but I tend not to recommend it. I found that people have a lot of trouble in those scenarios and get frustrated. And,
well, what temperature range do you need for the plant?
you know, ideally you might be somewhere between 74 and 78. So I tend to work with people individually because their spaces are different, and the closets aren't even all the same. They come in different sizes and shapes, and it's your genetics and where they come from, and the light that you choose, and the plant food. I prefer to work with people individually and to give them advice. I don't think growers should give each other advice, because what one person is doing isn't exactly the same as another. And a grow tent might be more appropriate than a closet, and finding that even if it's a tough shed, and putting that grow tent in a tough shed or something besides a closet. A grow tent has the advantage of being able to be vented. Intake and exhaust, a place to hang a light, it's reflective material. It's designed to grow plants in. Closet just doesn't have those advantages. That answer your question? Maybe? Yeah?
You mentioned about LEDs to the lady, and you talked about simulating sunlight. But do you have a recommendation on the type of lighting to use? Do you prefer LED in your experience because of the new ones coming out have the larger spectrum and whatnot? And then also probably comment on his about heat, controlling heat with LED instead of the other kind of lights.
The LEDs will give off less heat compared to an HID lamp, which burns at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of degrees, versus a LED chip, which burns maybe at 100, 120 degrees. So the LED science is what's been bothering me, and the idea that peaks of light, that red light, blue light philosophy, isn't what plants want. So when you shop and look, the science behind that light is what's important, because so many of those lights weren't made by plant scientists and people who understand photobiology. And there are only 1 or 2 in the world that I know of that have actual plant science behind it. I mean, that withstands scrutiny. So what you have is a lot of people saying anything they want. Everybody is an expert. Raise your hand if you've met an expert today. Everybody's an expert, and in this industry, and this, especially in growing. And I have a newsletter I'll hand out, or you can grab. The headline here is "Cannabis Growing BS Hits an All-Time High." And there's just so much misinformation and mythology and nonsense that exists within this industry, because it was originally designed for black market growing. And the black market growing isn't what will work in a medical and recreational state. So, excuse me 1 second. Told me, he said, Dan, don't worry about telling the crowd that if anybody is going to understand you, it's this crowd. So thank you for your understanding. Here we go. I did want to talk real quickly. Did I finish answering your question? Well,
It's okay.
no, we were talking about
Oh yeah, I was just saying though.
LEDs and the low heat
Want science proof about the spectrum
as you shop. So, but here in Hawaii, for the cost of energy being what it is, being the most efficient with the fewest watts is where you want to be. And I think all of you don't want to spend an arm and a leg and cut the energy company a check, a big one, every month. So there are LED lights, in fact, some here in the show, and that are even locally made, that have good science. And I'm a nonprofit, so my agenda isn't to sell you. I don't sell things. I'm not a salesman. My objective is to disseminate information. It's hard to find information about growing cannabis online. There's so much of it. So many books and different approaches and different ways to do things that it's very confusing. I mean, would you all agree that it's very confusing trying to figure out which way to go, what path might be best. It's a challenge. There are 1,000 bottles of things in a hydroponic store. And it's a culture of bottles that you don't need. It doesn't have to be that complicated to grow. I have some other pictures here I want to share with you. This was done in a grow tent, and it was done under LED. In many grow operations, you'll see people trying to grow trees. Well, what we tend to teach is that it's way more efficient to grow a bush than a tree, but with using static lights indoors. So what we do is start with short cutting that's pinched at the top so that it doesn't grow up. It wants to grow sideways. It wants to grow out like a bush. And that's the only pinch that you do in the process. And then we take that plant and then you make it into a hedge. So you train it to be a small round bush as it's young, and then as it gets bigger, that's one plant. One plant. Yeah. Can everybody see okay? Yeah. It's one plant in a 10-gallon grow bag rolled down about halfway. In fact, the gentleman that invented these procedures and protocols for growing is actually sitting in the back row there, 40-year veteran Gerald Garrison, inventor of the first grow lights in the hydroponic industry, and the first environmental controls and first systems for doing indoor growing at all. I've seen yields up 1.25, and Gerald is, of course, I think up to 3 pounds more.